Kabir, welcome to our podcast. We've been chatting for a while now and discussing all the different topics that we could tackle. But I thought one very important and interesting topic that we could start with you, I know we have another episode lined up, is about leadership. I know you're very passionate. This is something that you feel very passionate about. You've been the head of Rogers Capital since 2016 and at Rogers since 2007. So you've had this whole journey at Rogers. How would you describe your leadership style?
Well, first of all, thank you, Joanne. I am humbled by your invitation. My leadership style is probably unassuming, very casual, very informal. Hierarchy doesn't mean that much to me. And I try to operate within the empowerment/accountability model. I also believe in candid, contradictory yet time-bound and constructive exchanges. The more so that my guru used to say that criticism may not be agreeable, but it is necessary. It fulfills the same function as pain in a human body. That is, it calls for attention on an unhealthy state of things. So that's, in a nutshell, how I try to behave in the business.
So can we unpack two things? We'll go back to your guru later, because I'm sure our audience can't wait to hear who it is. And I was fascinated when I found out who it was. But when you said that your style was candid, time-bound, I think you said two other. Can you unpack this for us?
Yes, so candid, contradictory, constructive, and time-bound. This is, I think, in a nutshell. Obviously, in terms of a business, not only does it help to have contradictory discussions, but it is a sine qua non condition of progress, right? Just to make some kind of an analogy, the discipline of physics, right, really made a leapfrog, because one of the reasons was that Einstein and Max Planck disagreed. And through their discussions, they elevated the debate. And I think this is very much in line with the way we behave and act at Rogers. We are open to new ideas, even if some of them might create some discomfort. And I think the world and what we live in almost on a daily basis is flush with examples.
Have you encountered recently or in the last 7 years situations where you have completely changed your point of view as a result of these contradictory conversations?
I think as far as I am concerned, personally, I have to tell you that I am a scientific by formation, by profession, and by conviction, okay? And I have to say that since I started my career in 2000, and I'll be very honest with you, those things like emotional intelligence and so on and so forth were really remote, very remote notions for me. But with time and hopefully with wisdom as well, you learn, and that obviously provides you with some adjustments to the way you behave, the way you react, the way you think, and obviously the way you deliver as well. So I think this is one example to answer your question.
So now I want to go back to the guru. We were having lunch the other day with Anik, and I think, I don't know how we got into that conversation. I think we were talking about great leaders in general, and you mentioned the Second World War, and I said, oh, it must be Sir Winston Churchill, and it was. And you told us, you entertained us for quite a while with great many stories about that wonderful leader, many of which I didn't know. So What is your favorite story about Sir Winston Churchill? You probably have several.
Yeah, I do have quite a few of them, some of which, by the way, I wouldn't tell you.
Censored.
And I didn't know that you were about to trick me on that one. But maybe 2 or 3 for a good laugh. You know, Churchill is known to have said, "I am fond of pigs. Dogs look up to us, cats look down on us, but pigs, they treat us as equals," you know. The second one was during World War II. Churchill came back from a visit to Washington, D.C. And as soon as he landed, British journalists would ask him, "So, Mr. Churchill, what's your impression of America this time?" And Churchill would respond, "Toilet paper too thin, newspapers too fat."
He didn't comment on the alcohol on this occasion.
Well, alcohol was part of, well, if you want one on alcohol, I'll tell
yes,
you one.
please.
Churchill, well, you know, in his old days used to say, "You know, when I was young, I made it a point never to have any alcohol before lunch. Now that I have grown older and wiser, I make it a point never to have any alcohol before breakfast."
So between midnight and 6 a.m. What do you think made him a great leader? What attributes do you personally look up to?
Quite a few of them. Obviously, great leaders are great leaders in difficult times. And the least that we could say is that he was in charge in the most difficult of times. And I think that resilience, that strength of character. But I also have to tell you that it's a lot about his communication. People seldom know that Churchill was granted the Nobel Prize for Literature. Obviously a great orator, and that, you know, unassuming and witty character of his made of him, you know, someone special. I could tell you much more, but, you know, quite a character, obviously.
And do you agree with those people who say that he was a great wartime leader but a poor peacetime leader?
Yes, fact of the matter is that after the Allies won the war in 1945, shortly just after that, elections were held in the UK, and he lost to the Labour Party. He came back early in the 50s. But you are right. I mean, some leaders are made of a metal which make them, you know, shine in turbulent times. I think he was one of them, definitely.
And talking about resilience, you mentioned that was one of his attributes that you greatly admire. In a sort of a post-pandemic world in the financial services sector, in the industry in which you operate, how important do you think that attribute is in terms, and how have you personally found it?
If you look at the state of the world has gone VUCA for quite some time now. And it is very certainly a trend that will continue. We are overwhelmed by the 3 V's of data, namely variety, velocity, and volume. Economic cycles have gone schizophrenic. Geopolitics have turned erratic. Never in the past has technology been that disruptive. And with the latest progress in AI that you would have seen, it will become even more disruptive and, according to some, even destructive. Challenges around sustainability are here and are here to stay. I don't know about you, but We are yet to reconcile with the conundrum of a Gen Z at work. The nature of work itself is ever changing. We are required to make sound decisions much faster. We are required to engineer, re-engineer, reverse engineer much faster, and possibly with the challenges of sustainability, also bioengineer and geoengineer as well. We are required to learn, unlearn, and relearn much faster. So I think never before has the notion of agility been so pertinent and relevant to the current times.
In the environment in which you evolve, that's even more relevant, given that many people might not be aware, but Rogers Capital actually has 3 arms. So you have the fiduciary arm, in which tax is associated, you have the technology arm, and you have the credit arm. So how do you ensure, and you're managing director of all 3 of the whole Rogers Capital company, so how do you ensure seamless coherence among these 3 quite different groups actually?
Corporate culture is more about behavior, and it's more about how you go about things as opposed to the things themselves. So the fact that we are into 3 industries doesn't make so much of a difference here. We obviously have the same set of values. We endeavor to serve our clients, in the same way. Once again, in terms of attitude, behavior, and conduct, those are aligned, at least in theory. We don't have it all right, but I think the fundamentals would be here. And it's also a work in progress, It's not something that is cast in stone. You obviously have people coming in, and if you look at our own history, we've developed through acquisitions, and obviously through people coming from different work cultures. So it's a work in progress. It's something that you need to adapt constantly. But I think once the guiding principles set and agreed, becomes easier to steer your people.
And I guess one of the challenges that, you have the transition challenge and the integration of the culture challenge, but you also mentioned the Gen Z. Funnily enough, we had someone from the Gen Z last week to talk to us, and he was incredibly wise. But the truth remains that it's still, the intergenerational aspect is still a big issue, I would say, in corporates and in the financial services sector. How do you deal with it? Well, first of all, do you find it a problem or an issue to be dealt with? And how do you deal with the intergenerational aspect?
Well, I try to delegate it. I mean, those are funny characters. And you would remember our time, when we were going to work. I mean, we were going to work, not to play. I mean, they have a completely different perspective of the environment of work. And I must be completely transparent with you in saying that very few of us have really mastered that, that enigma. One of my colleagues, who leads the fiduciary sector, a couple of weeks back came to see me, and he was telling me, well, he started to smile and say, well, share the joke. And he would tell me, listen, we just recruited 2 people, Gen Z, and they don't want to do their timesheet.
They just said we're not doing
it. Yeah,
they
don't want to do their timesheets, And he would tell me, can you remember, would you actually even envisage back then in our time when we were in the consulting environment, you telling your manager or your partner that you are refusing to do your timesheet. But having said that, we have to compose with them. I mean, at the end of the day, they did it, but it requires, I think, more explanation. I think those people really require a sense of purpose in their jobs. They want to really understand the kind of impact that they are making at large, not only in the sphere of work, but beyond that. They are extremely conscious on matters of, ecology, sustainability, inclusiveness, and so on and so forth. So we're still learning.
Yes, and I think there's still probably a long road to go. But you are in a group that is quite passionate about sustainability in general. I think you're the CEO of your group. It's one of the things that he's quite passionate about. And do you find that as a selling point to the Gen Z, because that's one of the things that they are interested in?
I think it's definitely one of the selling points, right? The way I experiment is, I test it at home with my child, and she would show some character when you would discuss of those things. She would be extremely sort of, how do you say that, tenuous on things like, pollution, gender diversity, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, maybe the behavior might be irritating at times, but you rapidly come to the conclusion that they are fundamentally right, So we got to adapt, we can't just, be nostalgic about, the past, the good old days. This is the world. Either you play with it, or you don't succeed.
Yeah, and I think another aspect as well is that before, in probably our parents' generation, it was quite common to stay in a job for your whole life, basically, until you retire. And then we got to people of sort of more our generation who maybe do 20, 15 years in a place and then move up. Whereas now I feel that the Gen Z have, I wouldn't call it no loyalty, because I think, as you said, they're driven by purpose rather than, they're not particularly attached to one company or another. They're looking for purpose. But that in turn leads to another issue which our society is facing. I call it the Great Emigration, particularly in the financial services sector, in the accountancy firms, even in law firms, where looking in Mauritius is not enough for them. They are actually looking abroad, and they are moving abroad. Are you experiencing this problem as well? And two, how do we deal with this?
Well, when you said thoughts about the Great Emigration, I suppose you meant thoughts about the headache around the Great Emigration. We've unfortunately had our fair share of it, I have to tell you. We've probably lost between, in a very short time span, between 15 to 20 high caliber professionals who've left for Luxembourg, the Isle of Man, and other similar jurisdictions. It's calmed down now, hopefully. But I think policymakers and captains of industries need to understand that we now evolve in a global environment, and that scarce resources would go where they are the most demanded, the most needed. Hence what has happened. And this has also compounded with the pre-existing skills mismatch that we currently have on our labor market. I think we need to go as early as possible and as hard as possible on it, right? And I think it's about time that the trio, I would say, government, the industry, and the education sector get together to craft a long-term plan. And obviously, as you would appreciate, between the time you start executing the plan and the moment you start, you can expect some positive outcomes, is we will also need to have some palliative measures to operate. But it is a serious problem, and if left unattended, we, in the long run, not even in the long run, in the medium term, we might face some irreversible consequences on our economy. It is, I think, as serious as that.
Do you think recruiting from abroad might help, at least in the short term?
Definitely, but again, you would want a solution which is as inclusive as possible. First of all, to recruit locals with a fair share of foreigners in specific areas. That mismatch has now become structural, okay? Meaning that there are jobs available, there are probably a lot of jobs available, but the inadequacy between demand and supply needs to be resolved for the sake of, economic sustainability, right? So to the question, do we need foreign labor? The answer is clearly yes, but we also need to have our local people participate in the economic growth and development of our country,
And we're going to get into that in another episode, but just as a little teaser for our audience, do you think that AI may be part of the solution to deal with the Great Emigration? Could we replace some of the young talent we're losing with software instead?
Well, theoretically, yes, but you might delve into the question at length. You will still, require people. AI, obviously, which by the way is not a new technology, is quite old, is something that will facilitate, will enable, will fast track. But I think in terms of creativity, in terms of new things, in terms of innovation and intangible things, will still require people to do that. So the best way is to look at the whole ecosystem from the beginning at school till the onboarding in the industry, and try to craft a program both around capability and capacity building. I think this is an imperative. Il n'y a pas à sortir de là.
Looking ahead in the kind of the future of the financial services sector, obviously it's been quite tumultuous over the past decade or so, with the India Treaty being repealed, all the BEPS changes that we've had to make. Obviously our offshore, in between inverted commas, sector has been significantly impacted and affected. Where do you see the next big area of growth for our financial services sector?
If you look on our left, right, is a whole continent that is hungry of development. And mind you, it is not just a continent of a future. It is already a continent of a present, right? And on the far right is a whole region which very soon, in the years to come, is likely to overcome Europe as the largest FDI originator in Africa. So I think that the answer to your question would be in between the two of them, right? Forget not that 4 in 10 of the largest economies today are Asian economies. You would know that China and Japan respectively are the second and third largest. India is growing at an astonishing pace, and possibly in the next 10 years, from its current position of 5th largest before the United Kingdom, could overcome both Germany and Japan to become the 3rd largest. And it wouldn't be a surprise that South Korea overcomes Canada and Italy to become the 8th or 9th largest. I think Mauritius is uniquely positioned to act as that preferred gateway to and from Africa. And I think we need to be bold about it. It requires some bold measures in terms of strategy, in terms of strategic alignment, especially in terms of diplomacy, in terms of sea and air connectivity, in terms of skills, in terms of other things. And I would even venture to say that that positioning can make us earn our own living just by doing that. So that would be the very short answer to your question. Our destiny is probably to play a significant role between Africa and Asia.
And what would you say to, if I may be devil's advocate, if you look at countries like the UAE, we were talking about Dubai before recording, why would, and obviously Dubai has its own ecosystem, infrastructure much more advanced than Mauritius, etc., better connectivity. I think Emirates is probably the busiest airline in the world. Why would they choose Mauritius over somewhere like Dubai?
I think we've been closer to, even if we're not as close as we should, but I think we've been closer to Africa than, as compared to Dubai. Historically, we have had a number of treaties with African countries. We still have a number of IPPAs, notwithstanding that we are part of some common blocks, around SADC and other things. And if you look at Africa, in the past 50 to 100 years, it's also been a history of decolonization from the British and from the French. That's been our case as well. So I think from various perspectives, we are closer to them. Now, obviously, Dubai is I would like to think that our jurisdiction does not really compete with Dubai, but complements Dubai. But having said that, it's, I think, no excuse to be complacent. I think we need to go much faster. I think we also need to invite mainland Africa in Mauritius by having, more and more mainland African presence with us. If you look at the boards of directors of various companies and not the least, we don't have enough of African talent and expertise amongst us. So we got to fast track all of these.
In terms of your wish list for this year's budget, what would you be your top 2 wish list?
We got to go back to that positioning which, despite all the difficulties which has made Mauritius today, that is our positioning as a low tax jurisdiction conducive to foreign and private investments. I think that this value proposition has somehow been a bit diluted in the recent years, but I think it needs to be restored. And I think for a country like Mauritius, foreign investments is a testimony of our ability to continue to reinvent ourselves and obviously to compete against other countries and other jurisdictions. So I think in philosophy I would respond to your question by this. The second aspect, which I would venture to say, if you look at the history of Mauritius, if you'd ask me what has created our relative prosperity, I wouldn't hesitate to tell you that it's probably got to do with our education, okay, in difficult times, okay. And as far as education is concerned, I would make no compromise at all. We really need to aim at excellence in education at all levels, starting from primary school to the tertiary. Obviously, there's much more to be said, but since you asked the top two,
of course,
this is what I would...
specifically on education, what would be the one thing that you would improve then on the current system?
One of the key decisions that Rishi Sunak made since he got the top job, he decided that maths would become compulsory till A levels. I think those disciplines around STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths, are those that have proven their effect on creativity, innovation, and so on and so forth. So I think we need to be much more focused on that. But we also need to look at employability as well. That issue of skills mismatch probably originates from a lack of congruence of our education system. I also think that the industry and we as, I would say, decision makers of the private sector should become closer and closer to the world of academia in Mauritius. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's...
As you said, much more to be said on that topic. Maybe we can unpack that during another episode. But thank you so much for your insights, Kabir. It's been tremendously helpful. And I really look forward to the next episode where we will unpack AI in all its shapes and form and some of the things that you guys are looking into.
Thank you, Joanne.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.